Okay, our topic today is going to be a post that I put up earlier this week. I think it was on Sunday actually, and something I've really wanted to have been talking about for a while now, and the occasion occurred with last week's parsha, and it runs into this week's parsha, as we'll see. So the topic is really what happened once Abraham discovered that God is a personal God and not just the master of the universe. That changes everything, and really everything that we talk about in Chassidus, in Jewish psychology, is predicated. It's based on the idea that God is personal, which means really that we have to build a relationship with him. That's the big difference. You don't have to build a relationship with nature. If all that God was nature, then all you needed to do was to learn what the laws were and just act accordingly. Don't jump off buildings, as some woman did today or yesterday in Russia, and expect to survive. Doesn't work that way. So you could sort of, get the hang of that by the time you're 5-6 years old. And then there are all the other common sense things that you have to take care of and make sure that, brush your teeth and don't stay up too late and don't eat too much junk food and all these things. There's no real relationship that you have to develop that would require you to tap into your experience as a conscious sentient being, because animals have relationships with nature and they do pretty well. So personal God means not just the way that people think about it, that God is cognizant of the fact that I exist, that there's divine providence over the individual, over the details in the world. Nature, in a sense, is not aware of all the details. Nature doesn't really know me from you, and we're pretty much all the same. So personal God does mean that God is aware of me and you as separate beings, but that's only part of the picture. I think that the most important part of the picture is what kind of relationship do you have to develop because of that. And the Torah includes in these two parshas that are dedicated to Abraham a great deal of descriptions which are really cryptic in some sense. They're hard to decode, describing how Abraham developed this relationship and how he built it. And it offers us a lot of insight into what we're supposed to do ourselves. So one way of uncovering what's going on, and this is, I'm very keen on reading Torah this way, is to flesh out the time periods. The time is lacking from the Torah. It's not exactly there. Everything just seems to happen sequentially. This happened after that, and it seems like everything is done in a minute. Like when you read the narrative, it sounds like things take no time at all. But in truth, they take a lot of time. If we looked at Noah 2 weeks ago, so it seemed like Noah was, 500 years old, and then he's suddenly 600 years old, and there's a flood. So what happened in between 500 and 600? You could miss the point that he was engaged in building the ark and engaging with other people, and we said that he had a lot of problems in that area, and whatever we discussed in relation to that. In relation to, for instance, something that we have this week, at the end of this week's parsha, that God says to Abraham, take your son, your only son, the one that you love, Isaac. So right away, you're like, why is it said that way? Why not just say, take Isaac? I mean, we know he's your son, he's your only son. Rashi writes there, the sage's commentary, that he told him, and you have to flesh it out again. You have to fill in the blanks. First, Abraham heard, take your son. So he said, I have two sons. Then it said, your only son. So that's a little different. So he said, well, this one is an only son to his mother, and this one is an only son to his mother. And then he said, the one that you love, but I love them both. Isaac. Now I know who you're talking about. So why did it take so long? Why couldn't you just say it right away? So I think that the answer is, it did take a long time. This wasn't a prophecy or a revelation that Abraham received all at once. It may have taken years for him to come to the understanding that that's what God is saying to him. It could be that at first he knew, take your son. He knew there was something going on. Maybe 2 years later, it became clearer. It said, your only son. Then it became clearer, the one that you love. And finally, in the end, maybe after 10 years of having these recurring dreams, he finally came to the realization that God was talking to him about Isaac. Because we have to remember that in the Bible, it sounds as if God is speaking to people as we would pick up the phone and speak to them. But apart from Moses, none of the prophecies are like that. None of them were that clear. None of them were that simple. By Moses, it says that God spoke to him as one person would speak to another, face to face. That he saw, and there were no mysteries about what was being said. It was very clear. But all the other prophecies were very difficult. They didn't come out in one moment. So the big revelation that I had this year from a friend was that when the Torah describes in last week's Parsha the encounter that Hagar, the maidservant that had become Abraham's wife and from whom he had Ishmael, when she runs away from Sarah, she has an encounter with angels. Well, she seems to have an encounter with an angel. And this encounter, let's read it and see sort of what happens when you sort of breathe time into the encounter, and you don't just accept it as something that happens in the course of a moment. Okay, so let me open up the text here. I thought I had prepared it. Just one moment. Okay, make it just a tiny bit bigger here so that it's clear. And let's share it. Okay, so Abram, remember here, this is before Abraham's change of name. So his name is Avram here. So Avram said to Sarai, his wife was also named Sarai before she was named Sarah, your maid is in your hands, deal with her as you think right. This is Genesis 16. Then Sarai treated her harshly and she ran away from her. Now the sages say that she didn't just treat her harshly in the sense of harsh. It was a little bit more than that. And they say that what actually happened was that she had caused her a miscarriage, meaning she had been pregnant already. This happened, that Avram came onto Hagar and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was lowered in her esteem, meaning she started to see Sarah as inferior to her because now she was like the mistress of the house. So that's where all this started. So the sages say that Sarah caused Hagar to miscarry, and she lost her child. That's how bad it was. So an angel of the Lord found her. So then Sarai treated her harshly and she ran away from her. She ran where? She ran into the wilderness. That they were living in Beersheba at the time. An angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the road to Shur, and said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? You notice that he calls her the slave of Sarai, even though she was like a free woman now because they had freed her in order to marry Avram. Still, she said, I am running away from my mistress Sarai. So she's put in her place and she accepts it. And the angel of the Lord said to her, go back to your mistress and submit to her harsh treatment. And the angel of the Lord said to her, I will greatly increase your offspring, and they shall be too many to count. The angel of the Lord said to her further, you shouldn't have translated it this way. The right translation would have been, and the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are with child and shall bear a son. You shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord has paid heed to your suffering. He shall be a wild ass of a man. I don't know where they got this translation. It's very figurative. His hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him. He shall dwell alongside of all his kinsmen. And she called the Lord who spoke to her, you are El Roi, by which she meant, have I not gone on seeing after he saw me? And therefore the well was called Be'er Lachai Roi. It is between Kadesh and Bered. Hagar bore a son to Abram, and Abram gave the son that Hagar bore him the name Ishmael. Okay, so seemingly there's a repetition here that's not needed. And the angel of the Lord said to her, and the angel of the Lord said to her, and the angel of the Lord said to her, and so on. Three times the same thing. So Rashi right away quotes the sages in the Midrash, and they say that this was not the same angel. Every time it was a different angel. So I read this Rashi for years and I didn't understand what it was saying. What are you trying to say? That there's three different versions? What's going on here? Why would there be three different angels sent to talk to her? There are some that say there were even four, because the first time it says, and an angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water, and that was the first one. And then he said, Hagar, slave of Sarah, and then you have three more. So maybe four angels even. Why? Why not just send one angel and you can say all of this? The answer is because they're contradictory. They're not saying the same thing. They're giving three different messages, three entirely different messages. The first one asks her, where are you going? And remember, he called her the slave of Sarai, sort of putting her in her place. That's not, well, that's like a person running away and somebody finds them, right? Like a teenager running away or something like that. And somebody finds them and they accost them and they rebuke them and they tell them, what are you doing? Your parents are worried sick. You're causing them so much pain, but what's the reason that they ran away? Because they're in so much pain. So what did you help me by telling me that I'm causing my parents pain? The whole reason I'm running away is because I'm in pain. So this is not a very good answer for her. Yeah, I mean, it puts her in her place, but is this what she was looking for? Does this solve the problem? The next answer is, go back to your mistress and submit to her harsh treatment. So there's a side to say that this is the same angel, really, but you could also say that this is a different answer. It's not calling her a slave, and it's not this, and it's not that. It's just saying, look, I know you're a free woman now, and I know you deserve better, but you should go back and submit to the harsh treatment and don't take it so hard, and it'll be okay, and things will work out. But, this is your lot in life right now. So it's not exactly completely ignoring her, like the first answer was, but it's giving her some room, but telling her, look, you need to submit. So, and remember, we talked last week about submission, separation, and sweetening. So the first answer here, or the second answer maybe, is you need to submit. The third answer, or the second, depending again on how you count the angels here, is I will greatly increase your offspring, and they shall be too many to count. Remember, she had conceived and miscarried. So the second angel is telling her, or the third angel is telling her, this next angel is telling her, you will have many offspring. Even though you lost your child, he's already giving her some kind of solace, some kind of future, something to look forward to. It's a very different answer. I will greatly increase your offspring, they shall be too many to count. The last angel says, behold, you are with child. So in the literal reading of the Torah, she's conceived and she's still pregnant. But this is why the sages tell us that she miscarried, because there would be no need for the angel to tell her something that she already knew. If she had been pregnant all along, this angel would not have told her, behold means surprise, you are with child. She was convinced that she miscarried. By the way, it could be that they were twins. That could very possibly be. That one of the twins died, and Yishmael was the one who remained. It could be that it was a second pregnancy. We don't know. But this is the reason why the sages say, even in the literal reading of the Torah, you have to allow room for her having miscarried her first pregnancy from Abraham. So behold, you are with child and shall bear a son. And the child doesn't have to be a boy, but it is. It's going to be a boy. And you shall call him Ishmael. For the Lord has paid heed to your suffering. This is a completely different answer. Remember, the first one is just go back and submit. The zeroth one, or maybe the first one was, even before that, not even submit. It's just, you're a slave. What do you want? You never change status. And now suddenly, not only is he promising her children in the future, he's saying, you have a child right now. And that child is going to be a boy. And God has heard your suffering. And this is what type of man he's going to be. He shall dwell alongside all of his kinsmen. We'll leave out the bad part. So these are four contradictory answers. They're not the same. So what's going on here? So when the sages say these are four different angels, it's because there are four different messages. That much is clear. That is easy to see. The thing that I saw this year that I had never seen before was that you can easily say that this was a conversation. This was not just four different messages. The four different messages are because God is personal. You don't have to like the first message. At least that's what Hagar picked up in Abraham's house. In his household, where they believed in a personal God, and you talk to God, and you hear an answer, what happens if you don't like the answer? What do? Well, if you were talking to a person and they said something you didn't like it, one thing you could do is be silent. You're being told to go back, and you're silent and you don't move. So what does the other side understand? I guess you're not very happy with that response, right? So you think up another answer, another thing to say to the person. So she's having like a conversation with God. And in this conversation, she's as it were, holding out until she gets what she wants. Now, in the post, I called it haggling. And you can imagine that this becomes a staple in whoever is Hagar's offspring. She's haggling with God. And she's saying, look, I'm not happy with what you're giving me. I want better conditions. I want to sign an agreement with you, but this is not the contract I'm looking for. That's an amazing concept. Again, because we tend to see it as like, oh, right. I guess if you're from, that's what Rashi says, if you're from Abraham's household, then you're just used to seeing angels. That's what he says. But what about us? I'm not used to seeing angels. So how does this work for us? Well, the first thing to understand is she wasn't exactly used to seeing angels that just came out of nowhere. The angels appeared because a person was trying to develop their relationship with God. The angels in our life are very clear, or sometimes they're not so clear, but they also exist. We talk about this a lot. That's how the Baal Shem Tov saw the world. That there are messages being given to you all the time, especially when you give tzedakah, especially when you do good deeds for other people. They become messengers. They become like angels. And they tell you when you need to hear. But when you're trying to develop a relationship, there's give and take. There's a discussion. There's some kind of dialogue going on. That's what she saw in Abraham's house. That Abraham was used to living with the presence of God in such a way that he developed it as you would develop any relationship in your life. So it's a little strange for people to do this. People don't know how do you do this exactly? How do you? Well, you speak. You have to speak. You have to talk to God. You have to be willing to develop the relationship the way that you would develop any relationship in your life. You can't develop a relationship without speaking. But there's all kinds of ways of speaking. And I would say that from Hagar, we see something that is not the right way to do it. And the reason I'm saying this also is because this is the first time that we're seeing one of these sort of discussions or dialogues happening between man and God. I'm not sure we can count what we talked about last week as an example of this, although there is something there, and we'll talk about it in a moment. Last week we saw the covenant between the shards, and we saw how Abraham had fear, and he suddenly said, how will I know that I will inherit it? Well, we'll see that conversation didn't end where we think it ended. It actually continued 14 years later. We'll see in a moment. Well, actually, 24 years later. And we'll see how that works out in a second. But what I'm trying to stress is that developing a relationship with God is not necessarily, I mean, I've seen people do this. They go to the side of the room and they talk to God. That's fine. That works. And when you pray, you're talking to Hashem and you're doing these things. But there's more to it. There's more to it, and I talk a lot about this because this is a big deal by Rabbi Ginzburg. To really have a conversation with God, you have to, as I call it, have a vision. And I don't mean here a mystical vision. What I mean is that you have to have a vision of what you would like your life to be about. And it doesn't matter how old you are. I actually was going to invite somebody who's in the 70s today, and I forgot to send them the link, which is kind of too bad. Maybe I can do it as we speak. It doesn't really matter how old you are. And I'm very fond of saying this, that the Lubavitcher Rebbe had plans that he discussed with Rav Steinsaltz, which is why I know about them. He had plans for the next 30 years when he had turned 90. He literally had plans. Now imagine that. You're 90 years old. How much more do you expect to live? But he had plans for the next 30 years. Why 30 years? Because he could probably live to 120. How many 90-year-olds do we know that have plans like that? But the Rebbe didn't treat it as just being ordered and maybe a little, how shall I say, too optimistic. 90, not exactly how you're going to get to 120, exactly what you're going to do when you're 120. It's not just a sign of optimism. He did this because that's what it means to have a relationship with God. God is not the present. God is how the present becomes the future. And for the present to mold itself, to change into the future, you need to have a plan in place. You at least need to have a vision of where you want to go, even if you don't know yet how you're going to get there. One of the things I do with people when I coach them, I think one of the most important things that I've learned to do is to stress the fact that as good as your life is and as productive as you might be and as conscientious as you might be, and maybe as disorganized as you might be, you owe it not to yourself, but you owe it to building a relationship with God, to build and decide on 1 year and 3 year and 5 year and 15 year and 30-year plans that you need to work on from time to time. And you need to think about these things, because when you're making these plans, you're not just thinking, oh, I want to be rich in 10 years. When you're developing a relationship with God, you're asking, what is it that I can contribute to your world? What is it that I can give? That's developing a relationship. That's what it means to have a relationship with God. And having a relationship with God is not, God, how much are you going to give me? That is the answer. Maybe God's answer. But your question or your interest in the conversation, your interest in the relationship comes about when you think about what can you contribute. And it's almost like you come with options. And you say, so God, what amongst these options can you give me? But you have to know what you want. You have to know what's possible. And I think I've talked about this many times, that in the heavens, they're waiting for someone, anyone, to come and say, this is what I can give. This is what I can become that will be productive and useful for your great plan about what this world can become. And you have to phrase it like that, because if I'm not phrasing it that way, then it's not basis for a dialogue. We're not really having a conversation. Credentials 120-year plan with the Lord, $100 down. Okay. So the idea is that Hagar was building her future here. She didn't run away just saying, I can't take this anymore. This is not for me. We see that she picked up from Abraham maybe the most important thing that Abraham had, which is a vision. And she also wanted a vision. She also wanted to know what her life would be about. She wanted to chart her course. That's what it means to run away. That I want to be free, to be able to decide where I want to take my life. Because otherwise, it's not my plan. Right? Maybe that's one of the problems with Noah. The Noah, he's living someone else's plan. He never really makes it his own. Because if he would have made it his own, maybe the flood wouldn't have happened. Maybe he could have envisioned a different resolution to the problems of the generation. By the way, this is one of the things that I find myself the most talking to people about, which is about pessimism. The pessimism is a prophecy that fulfills itself. That's what the Rabbi called, you need to think good for it to be good. Except he said it like as a promise. If you think good, it will be good. But if you think poorly, if you think pessimistically, it will be bad. Because that's the power that God gave us. So Hagar is not satisfied with what God is offering her. That's why there's 4 different or 3 different angels here. Because each one is offering something and she's holding up for more. In a certain sense, that's good. That's very good, in fact. Because you should want to do more. But notice that this is not about what she's going to do at all. This is about what God is going to give her. So it's true that she's envisioning her child and not herself, directly at least. But still, this is not exactly the type of vision that Avraham would have developed. And Avraham's visions were about, what could I contribute to the world? What could I do? So think about his first vision, his very first one. Lech lecha me'artzecha וממולדתך מבית אביך אל הארץ אשר אראך ואברכך וגדלה שמך ויהיה ברכה ונברכו בך כל משפחות האדמה ובזרעך. So he says, I want to be a blessing. That's the bottom line of his vision. I want to be fruitful and multiply, and I want to become a blessing for all the nations of the earth. That's what he wants. How do you become a blessing? Think about it. I have a terrible tendency, which is I'm very critical. My nature is to be critical. And over the years, I've tried to change that, to understand that by being critical, you very seldom get to help people. Criticism almost never really helps them. I've learned that the only time that I can say any kind of criticism, if at all, is when somebody forces me to tell me their opinion, to tell them my opinion. If they force me to, then I should probably say some word of what I really think about what they're doing. But short of that, there's absolutely no reason for me to give anyone any criticism. What does it mean to be a source of blessing? That I can always find a way to strengthen what you're doing. The only time that I think that the Rebbe really criticized people was when they were down. I think he said, he didn't criticize it, but he said, a smart person like you, or a man of your stature, or this or that, probably knows that nothing is gained by being upset, and nothing is gained by being pessimist. The world becomes a better place, your life becomes a better place when you have a positive outlook. That's really how it works. I think that's really the most criticism that he ever said to people, to individuals, right? If it's a person who's working in a public office, it's a little bit different because, they have a public office. It's not criticizing them directly or criticizing what's going on in the office or how they're running it. But to be a blessing means to strengthen what people are doing. So whatever they're doing, there's always something good about it. So strengthen that. You don't need to criticize the bad. You can, I'm saying this as sort of how I've been working on this, trying to change my nature so that, like Abraham says, I want to become a blessing. That's a vision. That's who I want to become. That's what Abraham wants to be. That was his first vision. You can understand each one of these prophecies, each one of these revelations from God as a seal coming down to answer his vision of his future self. He has a certain picture of who he might become, and then he has a prophecy, yes, this is who you're going to become. Okay? And it's never too late, because Abraham started when he was 75. That was the first time he got this vision, or 70, according to some opinions. So that's an amazing thing. And Hagar picked up on this. And so she's running away to form her vision. And that's why she calls this place Be'er Lachai Ro'i, the well of the one, it literally means of the living one who has seen me. Ro'i, who sees me. Ro'eoti. Ro'i is like Ro'eoti, sees me. And it was one of these prophecies, or close to prophecy. She's hearing an angel where she feels that her request has been answered. This is the vision that I wanted, and I got it. So really, each one of the angels was giving her a little piece of what she wanted. So therefore, they had to be different angels, because each one is saying something different. Now this opens up, Lynn wrote something today on I think on this post that got me thinking about Abraham's next vision. Well, not the next, but the one after the next, that starts this week's Parsha, Vayera. And he also sees three angels. So I said it's a little bit of debate whether there are three or four that Hagar saw. So it would be clear if there were three in each case, then it would be clear that one is the rectification of the other, meaning that the vision that Abraham saw was like a rectification for what Hagar did. I want to explain what Hagar did, which I understand to be the mistake. The mistake is not haggling. You're allowed to haggle in a certain sense. The mistake is holding out and coercing. There's a difference between forcing reality to do something and holding out. They're not the same thing. Meaning you can have a very far-reaching vision and you hold out until you see it all fulfilled. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu had a far-reaching vision. What was his vision? That he would bring the Jewish people into the land of Israel. And he tried to hold out. And he prayed vehemently. It says 515 prayers. Well, I imagine that what that means is 515 different prayers that he might have prayed every single day. But God said no. There's a certain dignity to being able to accept no in a certain sense. It's not always yes. Not always yes. It's probably most of what you want, but there might be certain things that you can't get. Again, these are all questions of what can I contribute? They're not questions of, how much money are you going to give me, or how big is my house going to be? It's a question of how do I see myself as contributing to the divine plan? So Abraham has exactly, everybody calls it the debate, and they're surprised. But when you have this in mind, it becomes very clear what's going on. So let me scroll down to where this happens. Here we go. Okay, here it is. God said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? He's about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah and the 3 other cities there. He says, I can't hide from him. So he's going to know, because Abraham is going to become a great and populous nation, and all the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by him. So can I cover from him? Can I conceal it from him? He has some responsibilities, not like Noah. He has responsibility for other nations, for other people. For I have singled him out that he may instruct his children and his posterity to keep the way of God by doing what is just and right, in order that God may bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. Again, fulfilling his vision is becoming a blessing for the earth. Then the Lord said, so he said, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so great. I will go down to see whether they have acted altogether according to the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will take note. I'm not getting into this very difficult verse. If you want to hear the Hasidic or the philosophical or the Greek explanation for this verse, you can join the morning classes. They're on YouTube. And we're learning this, an essay based on this verse, Erdana. So the men, meaning the angels that came to Abraham, went on from there to Sodom, while Abraham remained standing before God. And Abraham came forward and said, so now he knows that God is planning to destroy them. So he's not, where's his vision? His vision is, I'm going to become a blessing. What does it mean? What does it mean to be a blessing? To be a blessing is a lot of times to advocate for someone. So somebody has to advocate for them, not like Noah, who didn't do anything. Why is he arguing? He's arguing because that was his vision. That's who he was supposed to come. What do you mean? Of course he's going to argue with God. It's not an argument. It's a fleshing out of what my vision is. It's fulfilling who I am. It's fulfilling what our relationship said about who I would become. My relationship with God is about who I become. So he says, Abraham came forward and said, will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? It's a winning argument. There must be some innocent there. I mean, Lot's wife, his daughters. There's innocence there. There are people, meaning here innocent, not bystanders, but people who are tzaddikim. I don't know why they called it innocent. The righteous. Will you sweep away? Will you destroy the righteous together with the wicked? That's really how it should be translated. How can you do that? Maybe there are 50 righteous people in the city. Will you then wipe them out and not forgive the entire city for the sake of the righteous 50 who are in it? I wonder why they keep saying innocent. It's righteous. So God says, Abraham says, far be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the righteous as well as the wicked, so that righteous and wicked fare alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? So God says, if I find within the city of Sodom 50 righteous people, I will forgive the whole place for their sake. You're right. So he knows that there's not 50. So he says, here I venture to speak to God, and I am but dust and ashes. Hagar couldn't say this sentence. Even though it's a personal relationship, you have to remember what's going on exactly. I am but dust and ashes. And I'm talking to God, meaning I understand that my visions, what I expect there to be, may not necessarily have the weight I think it does. And we're sort of saying what the Baal Shem Tov said, that know that this is the reason why you came into the world. You came into the world in order to develop these, call it plans about what you want to become, about how you want your world to be. But remember that still you're dust and ashes. It might not happen, but this is what it means to develop the relationship with God, to define what is it that I want. Where is it that I want to go? So again, and he has this long argument with him, going down to 45, and then 40, and then 30, and then 20, and then 10. It's sort of like Hagar's argument, but it's different because first of all, he's not advocating for himself, he's advocating for others. But secondly, what happens in the end? God answered, I will not destroy for the sake of the 10. If I find 10 righteous people, I won't destroy the city. When the Lord had finished speaking to Abraham, he departed, and Abraham returned to his place. He's done all he can. He's laid out the vision. He's laid out what he wants there to be. Now, God, it's in your hands. I can't, because again, this is not something that just how I'm going to be. This is how you're going to act, God. So in the end, there is acceptance at some level that I've said all there is to say, says Abraham. I've done what I can. I've fleshed out the vision. I've fleshed out the purpose of why I'm here in the world. And then what happened? Sodom was destroyed. But I want to see the end of it, that after it was destroyed and the morning came up, what happened? Next morning, Abraham hurried to the place where he had stood before the Lord. What does that mean? So the literal meaning is he had a certain place where he would pray, and he went back to that place. And from this we learn, the sages learned that a person should always pray in the same place. If you have a place in your home, if you daven at home, for instance, you pray at home. So the idea is you should always pray in the same spot. Why pray in the same spot? Because we learn from Abraham that helps the relationship develop. It's sort of like, you can imagine that you've got the screen in this one corner of the house, and that's where you're having your conversation with God. But what does it mean? He hurried to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And looking down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and all the land of the plain, he saw the smoke of the land rising like the smoke of kiln. And that was it. Why did he hurry back? Because it's his vision. It's his responsibility. This is what he's developing. He wants to see, where is it going? Well, in this case, it was clear where it went. He knew that God had promised him if he would find 10 righteous people, then he wouldn't do it. But he couldn't find them. There were not 10 righteous people to be found in Sodom, Gomorrah, and those 5 cities altogether. So that's the end of this vision. This is how it ends. But we learn from Abraham that you have to persevere here. You have to continue. And again, it might be a matter of a day. Let's say Shabbos, some woman who had a message for Rabbi Ginzburg, and he's not taking messages now. So she wanted to alert him about someone who had severe COVID in England and was in intensive care. And well, he got the message, but I don't know what he did with it. But at the same time, since I didn't know what he had done with it, I turned to all my WhatsApp groups and I put the name there, and I spent some time also trying to pray for him. And yesterday night, last night, they changed his name. They added Chaim to his name. So I knew it was pretty bad. And then this morning they said to keep praying, and towards the evening, I already got the message that he had passed away. So what do you do? What do you do with these things? So it's like Abraham came. I came back to my stender where I pray, and that's what. And the smoke is coming up. That's the answer. But it doesn't mean that I don't have to have a vision. And when I'm praying for someone, I have to see them getting up. I have to see that there is a reason. I have to advocate for them. Not just say the kapitel of Tehillim, not just say the chapter of Tehillim that I'm saying. but to look into it and see from it a vision of something in the future that's good. To find a way to advocate. That's the nature of a personal God. You have to forge the relationship based on visions of where you want to go, of where you want your life to go, where you want your contribution to be. When you do this the right way, then God speaks back to you. He sends an angel. So he's not going to be an angel in the sense of maybe some fiery angel in vision, whatever. Maybe it will be. But it'll be in the sense of you'll be able to read the answers from the reality forming around you. You'll be able to see it. So you have to treat this relationship as a living, breathing relationship like you would have with anyone. I don't know how much time other couples do, but I spend, I think, about 40, 50%, 60% sometimes of the time speaking to my wife about the next few years. A lot of our relationship is based on where we want to go together, what we want to do, how we can help each other. And basically, it's a vision for our family. We don't know what it will be, but we spend a lot of time talking about this because I hope that's what normal people do, right? That when you have a strong relationship with somebody, they're part of your life in the same way that you're trying to develop your life. So you're developing your joint life. And really, I most of the time don't have that much separate planning that I do. I mean, there are some things that my wife can't get involved in the initial stages, at least of, and I have to think about them myself. But eventually, at some point, I have to share it with her because it's going to affect us both. If I go in this direction, go in that direction, what am I trying to do? How am I trying to do it? What do we want to become? So the same thing is with God. If it's a personal relationship, I'm going to turn the sharing off. If it's a personal relationship, so that means that I have to spend time picturing it. Why did I just say picturing? Because I saw Bettina, and she pictures what she sees. So it's a gift that you can maybe draw it. But if you can't draw it, you have to see it in your mind's eye. You have to be able to see, what do I want to become? What can I produce? What can I do? You never know exactly how it's going to work out. You never know exactly how it's going to work out and become. But you have to spend time on that, like Abraham does. And so many of the stories we had last week and this week about Abraham are about these dialogues, which when you add this time dimension to them, you see that he's becoming Abraham through them. These are not sort of, pastime conversations. These are forging conversations. They're creating him. They're making him into who he is. These are the conversations he's having, and everybody in his household is having. When Sarah says, Ishmael will not inherit with my son Isaac, that's not I'm putting my foot down here and this is where it ends. That's not that type of statement. It's a vision. This is not going to end the way you think it's going to end. So what do you want to do about it? So God says, listen to her. Why? Because she does the vision thing better than you do. She sees it better than you do. She understands better than you where you as a couple are going, where you as the begetters of a nation are going. So she sees the future, as it were, better. That's where prophecy becomes closer to the idea of seeing the future. And Ilana asks if you have to verbalize. So I see from Abraham that you have to verbalize. Rabbi Nachman talks about you have to verbalize. All of Chassidus talks about the fact that you have to verbalize. So seeing is hard too, but verbalizing is where it really fleshes out. It's where it really becomes, and you have to talk. Yeah, I mean, you have to talk to Hashem. That's the conversation. We talked a lot about the words are what form our psyche. I keep saying this, that it appears in many places in Chassidus that the nefesh, the psyche, is made out of letters. I mean, these letters have to be formed into words. They have to be joined into sentences. They have to create paragraphs. They have to become meaningful to us. And when they become meaningful, then we begin to understand ourselves. We begin to see where we're going. And by the way, this is how you need to run a company also. There's no difference. If you're running your private life, your personal life, or you're running a company, or running any kind of organization, the same approach needs to be used. You have to sit around and share visions of where are we going? What are we trying to do? Maybe we'll do 10% of all the 100% we want to do, and we might be fortunate and do 80% of it or 100% of it. But if you never verbalize it, if you never discuss it, if you never try to picture it, then you really don't know where you're going. Okay, so that's for today. Yes, in the beginning, these are always, well, when I do coaching, I help people really, I mean, there's all kinds of techniques about how to really, again, there are different pictures you need to have, a 1-year picture, a 3-year, a 5-year, a 10-year, a 15-year, 30-year. You have to, each one of them is different. And the moment that the scope is different, the types of things that go into it are different. There's a lot to work on. But in the end, yes, it starts out not so clear, and it becomes clearer as you go along, and it changes all the time. You have to know that it changes, because as you discover more, and maybe you achieve some of these things, you begin to understand maybe something is then you have to understand that there are things that will change about you too, because this changes you, because you're becoming something. It helps. Lana's asking whether you have to verbalize, even in initial stages where it's not clear. The more you can verbalize, the better. Again, Reb Nachman's approach is just go out into the field and start talking. The Chabad approach has always been that you do it during davening, and that's the way it was done for many, many generations.